Existential horror. Can you say that? Apparently I can. Let's talk about what it means. You're welcome for that one. There you go. Welcome back, guys. My name is Rob. This is my mom, Karen. This is Books, Banter, and Beyond. And today I have this large book in front of me, HP
Huge.
Lovecraft. This is actually a compilation, so it's not like an entire book.
I thought that was how you exercised, Rob.
That is how I exercise. I don't
Bicep
need to do
curls.
this. It's like lifting the dog up and down, and then you're done. All right, so existential horror and Cthulhu. Those two words go hand in hand, and if you are a fan of the author HP Lovecraft, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But how did this guy take over the niche of horror? So we've talked about him a lot, and there's lots of ups and downs. You know, there's the real person he was that we don't talk about, but there is the writing that he did. And
Right.
many people will have to agree that when it comes to fear, this is the man that brought it to life, right? So to him, horror was not just a jump scare or a ghost, right? To him, it was deep meaning, existential. Basically, to him, horror was the fact that we are so tiny in the universe and there's so much around us we didn't know. That's what scared him. And that's what should scare us, right? So, characters like Cthulhu, who are one of his main creatures there, represented basically the control of the universe. So, in a sense, it's kind of similar. It's his god creature in his story. So, whereas religion, we have God, in his stories, he has the creature that represents basically who controls the universe, right? But why did it get so popular? And I think, we've talked about him a lot before. I think his popularity stems strictly from the mental psyche of what people enjoy, right? We've talked about Stephen King and how he writes fear well, but Lovecraft really makes you think. And I think thinking and horror are things you don't want to do necessarily.
Right.
Because if you watch a horror film or if you read a horror book, you don't want to put yourself in those people's shoes.
Right.
I don't, at least. But Lovecraft forces you to think about what it means to be alive, what it means to be you, right? And it asks a lot of philosophical questions, such as what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? How did we get here? One of my favorite books that we talked about prior was 2001: A Space Odyssey. That kind of covered that same idea. And Arthur C. Clarke talked about how we don't know what's out there and we need to be careful because we don't want to control what we can't control, right? So Lovecraft is saying the same thing here. I know you haven't read any of his stuff. Everything you've learned was from me. But those who are out there, Call of Cthulhu is his big title. But he has many. There's Dagon, which is basically a group of fish people. He has one of the In the Mouth of Madness that was turned into a film with Sam Neill, where basically this author goes to a town and kind of goes crazy because he's trying to figure out this impossible mystery that can't be solved. He ends up going nuts because he dives too deep into it.
Right.
So in a weird way, Lovecraft does to horror what nobody has really done since, which is basically, it's good to be scared because it makes you think, it makes you use your common sense, right?
Right.
Well, I find that interesting.
Yeah, and again, in terms of, you've done a lot of research, and so I learned from you. But he calls it, or you're calling it, cosmic horror.
Yeah, so one reason why he does that is because a lot of it does take place outside the world. So, we've talked about alien stuff on different shows we've done, but basically his idea is similar to what some scientists say about extraterrestrial life. His idea of real horror is what you can't see. I know we talked about a Star Wars book, and one of the main characters for the longest time was invisible. And you could hear her, you could sense her, but you couldn't see her, right? And that's what his existential is. It's the fact that you are fighting an invisible force.
And the Lovecraft influence has spilled over, right, into games.
Oh, yeah.
all sorts of stuff that, and not all horror books do that. But the
Right.
love,
And actually, what's
why
interesting is
is
I
that?
learned this recently because I guess copyright wasn't really a thing. So the reason why he's actually everywhere is because they're allowed to take him and use him.
Ah.
So video game companies, movies, other stories, they're allowed to use his name. Now, it's funny because usually a classic, well, maybe not, maybe classics are kind of used because there wasn't really a copyright back then. But Lovecraft is basically public domain for the most part.
Hmm.
One reason why he's everywhere is because you're allowed to take him. So a lot of video game companies now will make psychological video games where you're basically in the Lovecraft realm, right? There's a lot of movies that aren't directly called Lovecraft something, but they use the creature. There's one called Underwater, where basically there's no mention of it, but it's there, and you assume that it's the Lovecraft monster, right?
So has he influenced? I mean,
Is
how-
overcoming because he's so well used that you can't not use him, I guess.
so would you say that Lovecraft's portrayal of cosmic horror has influenced modern horror of today?
It's actually an interesting one to ask. A lot of people, whether it's book or visual, they try, and I say try because horror is very hard to not imitate. They try to make it their own thing. So, for instance, somebody like King used personal trauma to write his story. So, a lot of his books are based off of what happened to him, right? However, Lovecraft has his hand in the cookie jar, so to speak, on everybody. Not to say everybody is using him, but if you read various horror or thriller or suspense authors, you'll start to notice a theme that you go, wait a minute, I've seen that before, but where? And when you go back far enough, you go, oh, that's out of Lovecraft. So it may not be purposeful, it may not be necessarily what they wanted, but it's kind of hard to get away from because he has this grasp right on the genre.
So do you think there's certain aspects of his writing style that, if really allows to create that sense of dread in his
So
stories?
the one, I mean, and this is a very bold statement from a book lover, but I would say of people who can write, he's probably one of the best writers of all time, even throughout today. And I say that solely because of that fact. Not a lot of people can directly write something, whether it's a poem, whether it's a book, whether it's a screenplay, and really drag you in. And the one thing he does is I think he leaves open ended a lot of things. So he asks a question, he starts to answer, but then he kind of just disappears, and it leaves you going, what the hell? Like what I want to know what it is. So his writing style is very, very specific, but it's very, very well done. And I think it's because of his questioning writing
Right.
versus a plot where you have A, B, C, and then you're done.
Right, and he often delves into how insignificant we all are, right?
Yes, and I think the fact he asked these questions of, where is your place in life? What is the purpose of everything? And it's not so much in my mind that he's looking down on people as much. I mean, yes, he did have his things in real life, but it's more so in my mind when you read these characters, it's more of a you're placed here in a world of billions, right? Or
Right,
however many there were at the time. And, this was before we even knew about other planets. So, this was
right.
before he knew that there was a solar system, right? So when you read it now, you really start going, whoa.
I I think of that picture, where it's there's a little dot, and
Uh huh.
it says you are here, and there's the everything else is like humongous around you, and that's what I think. I mean, having not read the books, but as you talk, the fact, the insignificance of us in the bigger picture of the whole world, that's, I think of that picture. Have you ever seen that, where it's a little dot on the page and it literally says, "This is you"?
And there's one I saw where then it just goes out and then it pans out to just the world, and then you're
Right.
like, and you don't even see the dot anymore because it panned out so wide. You're like, wait,
Right.
where'd I go? What?
Where did I go? And it makes us feel that again, and I see that as a positive and a negative. I look at that also that we are part of something that is so much bigger than we are. But when you look at
Right.
it the way he says it, we're just that little dot.
Right, and it makes for good. And it's not to say that other genres are bad. Obviously, I love a good fantasy, kind of drifting off into another world.
Right.
But what he writes is something not a lot of people do anymore. And maybe it's because it's hard to do. Maybe it's because it's uncomfortable to write about. But he really writes more about real
Mhm.
nonfiction than fiction. But he's using all of this grand words and all this mastery of writing to basically just say, look at you, look how much you can do, but also be aware of your surroundings. I mean, there's so much you don't know, and you just have to kind of navigate the best you can, right? So in a weird way, it's kind of like it's a self-help maxed up in a horror. It's like, hey, how do you manage to do this? That's I know, very far-fetched, but
Well, I'm laughing
he's
because I like self-help books. So you're literally telling me I should go read this.
maybe not you, but most people, yes. No, but yeah, he definitely is one of those guys that, if you have the time and you have the patience to learn, he's a very, very interesting person in his books. I say just read his books, just read his stuff. But yeah, I think he's great, and I think from now on forever, anytime somebody makes a character or something, it's going to come back to him somehow.
Love it. Love it. Well, as always, Rob, always fun doing this. We hope to see all of you next time on Books Banter and beyond. Goodbye, everyone.